$200. That was the price stamped on birth certificates issued by the Sisters of Perpetual Mercy in southern Louisiana between 1842 and 1856. 14 years of meticulously kept records. 87 babies sold to plantation families across 3 parishes. The sisters called them blessed adoptions, promising that each child came from unfortunate circumstances requiring Christian charity. But then, one March afternoon in 1856, when flames devoured the east wing of the convent, the ledgers revealed a very different story. Every single infant had been born within those walls. The names of the mothers were recorded in a separate book locked away in the Mother Superior's office, and each of those mothers wore the habit of a nun by day, while laboring in the convent's cotton fields by night. The church buried the evidence within 48 hours. Yet 3 letters survived, written by women who had never learned to write their own names. What these letters revealed would challenge everything the parish believed about faith, about mercy, and about the women who claimed to serve God. St. Augustine Parish stretched along the western bank of the Atchafalaya River, where moss-draped cypresses cast long shadows across water the color of weak tea. In 1840, the parish had 11 sugar plantations, 23 slave quarters, 2 cotton gins, and exactly 1 Catholic institution, the convent of Our Lady of Sorrows. The sisters had arrived from France in 1808, part of a wave of religious refugees fleeing Napoleon's persecution. They were given 80 acres by the Devoux family, wealthy sugar planters who saw spiritual prestige in hosting brides of Christ. The convent sat 2 miles from the river, connected to the main road by a shell path that turned to mud under Louisiana's brutal summer rains. Its main building rose 3 stories built of handmade brick, with iron balconies imported from New Orleans. Behind it stood the chapel, modest, with stained glass windows depicting the 7 sorrows of Mary. Beyond that, barely visible from the road, stretched the work buildings, a laundry house, a kitchen garden, a small infirmary, and what locals called the penitent house, where the sisters supposedly housed women seeking refuge from sin. By 1842, the convent housed 23 women, dressed in the black habits of the order. Mother Superior Celeste Beaumont, 61 years old, had led the community for 18 years. She recorded everything with meticulous precision: the cost of candles, the weight of harvested vegetables, the number of prayers said each day. Locals respected her severe devotion. She rarely smiled, never raised her voice, and handled parish business with the discipline of a military commander. The other nuns remained largely invisible to the outside world, appearing in town only for special masses or when delivering charity to the poor. The parish knew the sisters supported themselves through various enterprises: a small school for the daughters of wealthy families teaching French needlework and religion, selling vegetables and preserves, taking in laundry from plantation families. And according to discreet announcements in the New Orleans Catholic Register, they occasionally facilitated Christian adoptions for wealthy but childless families. No one questioned these arrangements. Louisiana's Catholic families trusted the church implicitly. If the sisters said a child needed a home and if a family could afford the charitable donation of $200, the transaction seemed blessed by God Himself. Babies arrived healthy, baptized, their birth certificates signed by Mother Superior Beaumont and witnessed by Father Antoine Dufresne. What no one knew, what no one could have imagined, was that behind this charitable facade existed a system as calculated and cruel as any plantation slave economy, a system that turned faith into currency and transformed women's bodies into profit. The truth began with a woman named Ruth. Ruth arrived at the convent in April 1841. Arrived suggests choice, but Ruth had none. She was 19 years old, the property of Charles Devo, grandson of the family that had donated the convent. Charles owned 42 enslaved people across his 300-acre plantation. Ruth was one of them, born in the quarter's daughter of Sarah, who had died when Ruth was 12. That spring, Charles had a problem. His wife Amali noticed changes in Ruth's appearance, signs that hinted at the inevitable consequences of Charles's regular visits to the quarters. Amali, raised in New Orleans society and educated by Ursuline nuns, knew precisely what those signs meant. But confronting Charles directly would have been improper. Instead, she found a solution that satisfied both propriety and revenge. Amelie suggested that Charles donate Ruth to the Sisters of Perpetual Mercy. "The convent always needs help," she said sweetly over breakfast. "It would demonstrate our family's continued commitment to God. No one would question a master lending a servant to support God's work. And Ruth will disappear from the plantation, away from my daily humiliation at Charles's nightly attentions." Charles agreed, immediately relieved to have the problem solved without scandal. He delivered Ruth to the convent on a Tuesday morning in late April, when dogwoods bloomed and the air smelled faintly of honeysuckle and river mud. Mother Superior Beaumont met them at the door, her face impassive as Charles explained that Ruth would serve the convent for as long as the sisters found her useful. "We accept this charitable gift," Mother Superior said, her French accent still thick after 33 years in Louisiana. "The girl will be put to good use in God's service." Ruth stood between them, silent, as required, her hands resting over the slight swell of her belly, a swell that would become unmistakable within weeks. She wore the rough cotton dress of a house servant, her hair wrapped in a faded yellow cloth. She did not look at Charles, nor at the nun before her. Years ago, she had learned a simple truth: invisibility was survival. Charles departed without another word. Ruth never saw him again. Mother Superior led her through the main building. They passed parlors furnished with donated furniture from parish families, the refectory where sisters ate in silence, and the chapel where candles flickered before plaster saints. Across the courtyard, past the kitchen garden, were 3 figures in black habits bent over bean plants. They approached a long, low building Ruth had not noticed from the road. "This is the penitent house," Mother Superior said, producing a key from the ring at her waist. "Here women come to contemplate their sins and seek redemption through labor." The door opened onto a corridor lined with narrow doors on both sides. The air smelled of lye soap sweat and something else Ruth could not name, something metallic iron-like, the faint echo of blood. Mother Superior opened the 3rd door on the left, revealing a tiny room, barely 8 feet by 10. A narrow bed with a thin mattress, a chamber pot, a small table and a wooden cross on the wall. "You will sleep here," Mother Superior said. "You will rise at 4:30 when the bell rings. Work in the fields until noon, rest for 1 hour, then work in the laundry until 6. You will eat 2 meals daily. Speak to the other women only if necessary for work. Pray for the salvation of your immortal soul. When your time comes, Sister Maratea will attend you. After recovery, you will return to work. Your child will be given to a good Christian family who will raise it in the faith. This is God's mercy toward your sin. Ruth finally looked up, meeting the Mother Superior's eyes. They were grey cold, like river water in January. Do you understand? Ruth nodded. Say yes, Mother Superior. Yes, Mother Superior. You will address all sisters with proper respect. You will be obedient in all things. Disobedience will be corrected through prayer and fasting. Severe disobedience will be corrected through other means. Do you understand? Yes, Mother Superior. Good. Sister Josephine will bring you work clothes. Remove that dress, it is unsuitable for field labor. Mother Superior departed, locking the door behind her. Ruth stood alone, listening to footsteps fade down the corridor. She placed one hand on her belly, feeling the small life that had sealed her fate, and wondered what kind of mercy brought her here. She would learn the answer over the next 5 months. Ruth's first morning in the penitent house arrived at 4:30 in darkness, so complete she could not see her own hands. Movement stirred in the other rooms. Footsteps coughing a child's brief cry quickly hushed. Sister Josephine unlocked her door and handed her work clothes, a rough grey dress, and a straw hat. As Ruth dressed, she counted at least 5 other doors being opened along the corridor. In the dim, pre-dawn light, she saw them 6 other women aged 15 to 25, all in various stages of pregnancy. They moved silently, heads bowed, following Sister Josephine toward the fields behind the convent. Nobody spoke. Nobody met anyone else's gaze. The cotton field stretched 20 acres behind the penitent house, hidden from the main road by a line of live oaks. This was the convent's industrial enterprise, sanctioned by the parish as a way for the sisters to become self-sufficient. Cotton was sold to brokers in New Orleans, the proceeds funding the convent's operations. What the parish did not know was who labored there morning and evening, 6 days a week, 50 weeks a year. Ruth joined the line of women picking cotton under Sister Josephine's watchful eye. A bell rang if anyone slowed their pace. The work was familiar. Ruth had picked cotton since age 6 on the Deo plantation. But pregnancy made bending and breathing a struggle. By sunrise, sweat soaked her dress. Her back ached. The baby pressed against her bladder. She worked mechanically. Hands moving through motions she had performed thousands of times, her mind elsewhere, remembering the quarters where she had community conversation, shared suffering. Here, there was only silence and the rustle of cotton plants. At noon, Sister Josephine rang her bell. The women filed back to the penitent house where tin bowls of beans and cornbread waited on a long table. Ruth ate ravenously. Across from her, a younger girl, perhaps 16, met her eyes briefly, then looked away. After the meal, the women moved to the laundry house, enormous copper vats for boiling water, long tables for scrubbing. Here they washed linens for the sisters, altar cloths for the chapel, and the more profitable laundry from plantation families who paid well for the convent's services. Steam thickened the air. Ruth's hands blistered in the first hour, lie burned into unnoticed cuts from the cotton bowls. By 6 o'clock, when Sister Josephine finally dismissed them, Ruth could barely walk back to her room. She collapsed on the narrow bed, too exhausted to care about hunger, fear, or the future. Sleep came immediately, dreamless, until the bell rang again at 4:30. This became her life. Days blurred together, marked only by increasing difficulty as her pregnancy advanced. Names were learned in whispers in the laundry house where Sister Josephine's vigilance sometimes faltered. Lydia, 15, who cried quietly each night. Hannah, 23, pregnant with her third child for the convent. Esther, Clara, Denina, Naomi. All enslaved women sent to hide masters' sins, or removed by mistresses who wished them out of reach. Some women had already delivered children and returned to work. Hannah whispered that she had birthed 3 children in the penitent house. Each had been taken within days of birth, never to be seen again. The sisters called it God's mercy, providing Christian homes for children who would otherwise be born into sin. They paid $200, Hannah whispered, glancing at Sister Josephine's retreating back. Ruth absorbed this in silence. $200. On the day of plantation, a strong field hand sold for $800. A skilled carpenter or blacksmith might bring $1,200. And a baby, $200. Not a sale, of course, not officially. Adoption facilitated by charitable sisters. The mathematics settled in Ruth's mind like puzzle pieces she did not wish to see. 7 to 9 pregnant women at any given time. Each delivered a child. Each child taken. At $200 per baby, 10 to 12 babies a year, the convent earned $2,000 to $2,400 annually from this charity alone. Enough to feed the women, maintain the penitent house, and justify their existence. Ruth realized with a sinking heart that it was slavery, refined, efficient, cloaked in faith. Masters profited by removing evidence of their sins. And the parish. They remained blind to everything. The church profited by selling the consequences, and the women themselves, already enslaved, became vessels for reproduction. Their bodies were turned into factories producing profit disguised as mercy. That night, Ruth lay awake in her narrow room, feeling the small movements of her baby inside her. And for the first time, she understood with crystalline clarity the full weight of her imprisonment. She was trapped in a system that would take everything from her: her freedom, her dignity, even the child she had never chosen to conceive. Yet she knew she would grieve that child when it vanished into some wealthy family's nursery. And she also understood something else nobody would ever believe it. Who would question the Sisters of Perpetual Mercy? Who would investigate a convent's charitable adoptions? Who would listen to the testimony of enslaved women, forbidden even to speak in public? The perfect crime, Ruth thought, is always the one disguised as virtue. Her baby was born on a humid September morning in 1841, when the air felt almost thick enough to drown in. Sister Marie-Thérèse attended the birth assisted by Hannah, who had delivered enough children to know the rhythm of it by heart. 14 hours of labor. Ruth screamed until her voice gave out, then suffered in silence, grinding her teeth against pain that seemed to tear her from the inside. When the baby finally emerged, Sister Marie-Thérèse cleaned him efficiently, wrapped him in a white cloth, and held him up for Ruth to see. A boy, small but healthy. His eyes were closed, fists clenched, face red from the trauma of birth. "You may hold him briefly," Sister Marie-Thérèse said, voice not unkind. "Then he must be baptized." Ruth took her son in her arms, memorizing every detail of his small, perfect face. Tiny crescents of fingernails, soft skin. The faint, questioning sound he made, not quite a cry. She pressed her lips to his forehead, breathing in the new, clean scent of him already breaking her heart. 10 minutes maybe 15. Then Sister Marie-Therese took him away. Ruth was left alone in the birthing room, bleeding onto sheets that would be burned rather than laundered, her arms empty, her body hollow. She was not allowed to attend the baptism. Later, Sister Marie-Therese told her that Father Dufresne had performed the sacrament in the chapel with Mother Superior as witness. The baby had been named Thomas, a good Christian name. He would leave for his new family within the week once Ruth's milk dried, and he could be fed properly. For the next 3 days, Ruth remained in bed, recovering. Hannah brought her meals and tended her bandages. On the 4th day, Sister Josephine appeared at her door. "You will return to work tomorrow," she said. The harvest does not wait for personal weakness. Ruth returned to the fields on legs that shook, body aching in ways she had never known possible. She worked through pain, through grief, through a numbness that felt like being underwater. She never saw Thomas again. She did not know which family took him, whether they were kind or cruel, whether they would ever tell him he was adopted. The not knowing was a torment all its own. Over the next 3 months, 2 other women in the penitent house gave birth. Lydia delivered a girl who cried constantly for a few brief days before she disappeared. Clara delivered twins, a boy and a girl sold as a pair for $350. Ruth knew this because she overheard Mother Superior discussing the transaction with Father Dufresne in the courtyard, their voices carrying through the laundry house window. The Robichaud family was particularly pleased to receive 2 children at once. Mother Superior remarked that they had increased their donation by 50%. Most generous. God's blessings multiply. Father Dufresne replied, "Your work here is truly miraculous, Mother Superior. These orphans find loving homes and the convent's mission continues." Ruth's hands clenched around the sheet she was scrubbing. Orphans. That was what they called the babies, as if their mothers were dead rather than enslaved women 20 yards away, breaking their bodies in cotton fields to support the very system that had stolen their children. That evening, Ruth spoke to Hannah in the refectory, breaking the rule of silence while Sister Josephine was in the kitchen. "How long have you been here?" Ruth asked softly. Hannah's eyes flicked nervously toward the door. 5 years, since I was 18. Do you ever... Ruth faltered, unsure how to phrase the question. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Hannah laughed bitterly. "Where would I go? I am property of the Theat family. They sent me here. If I run, they'll find me, and it will be worse. At least here I'm fed regularly and not available to the master every night. But the children," Ruth pressed. "Don't you want to know where they are?" "Of course I want to know." Hannah's voice cracked. "I want to know if they're treated well, if they're learning to read, if anyone tells them about me. But wanting doesn't change anything. This is how it is. This is how it will always be." Ruth stared at her cold, congealing bowl of beans. Perhaps Hannah was right. The system was too entrenched, too profitable, too protected by religious authority. Yet something in Ruth's mind refused to accept it. There had to be a way to expose this, to make someone listen, to stop the sisters from continuing their work. The problem was, Ruth could not read or write. None of the women in the penitent house could. That was no accident. Illiteracy ensured that the story of what happened here would remain invisible, trapped in silence, hidden behind the veil of virtue. The sisters called it God's mercy. They said providing Christian homes for children who would otherwise be born into sin. They paid $200. Hannah whispered, her eyes flicking towards Sister Josephine's retreating back. I heard Mother Superior tell Father Dufresne, $200 for each baby to families who want children but cannot have them. The money supports the convent's work. Ruth absorbed the words in silence. $200. On the Deo plantation, a strong field hand sold for $800. A skilled carpenter or blacksmith might bring $1,200. A baby, apparently, worth $200. Not a sale, of course. That would be slavery, and the church officially opposed that. This was adoption, facilitated by charitable sisters requiring only a donation. A donation that curiously always came to the same amount. The mathematics clicked into place in Ruth's mind, like puzzle pieces she did not wish to see. At any given time, the convent housed 7 to 9 pregnant women. Each delivered a baby. Each baby was placed, never called, sold. At $200 per child, 10 to 12 babies a year, the convent generated $2,000 to $2,400 annually from this charitable work alone. Enough to feed the women, maintain the penitent house, and justify their existence. Ruth realized with a sinking clarity that it was slavery, but refined, cruelly efficient. Masters profited by removing evidence of their sins. The church profited by selling the consequences. And the women themselves, already enslaved, were transformed into vessels for reproduction. Their bodies became factories for profit disguised as mercy. That night, Ruth lay awake in her narrow room, feeling her baby move within her. And she understood with crystalline clarity the system that had trapped her. It would take everything: her freedom, her dignity, her child. Yet she would mourn that child when it disappeared into a wealthy family's nursery. She also knew that nobody would ever believe it, even if she tried to tell them. Who would question the Sisters of Perpetual Mercy? Who would investigate a convent's charitable adoptions? Who would listen to the testimony of enslaved women? Forbidden even to speak publicly. The perfect crime, Ruth thought, is always the one disguised as virtue. Her baby was born on a September morning in 1841, when humidity hung so thick it felt like drowning. Sister Marie-Thérèse attended the birth assisted by Hannah, who had delivered enough children to know the rhythm and pain by heart. 14 hours of labor. Ruth screamed until her voice gave out, then suffered in silence, grinding her teeth against a pain that felt as if her body were tearing itself apart from the inside. When the baby finally emerged, Sister Maria-Thérèse cleaned him efficiently, wrapped him in a white cloth, and held him up for Ruth to see. A boy, small, healthy, his eyes closed, fists clenched, face red from the trauma of birth. "You may hold him briefly," Sister Marie-Thérèse said, voice not unkind. "Then he must be baptized." Ruth took her son in her arms, memorizing every detail of his face, tiny crescents of fingernails, soft as rose petals. A small, questioning sound that was almost a cry. She pressed her lips to his forehead, breathing in his new clean scent, already breaking her heart. 10 minutes, maybe 15. Then Sister Marie-Thérèse took him away. Ruth was left alone in the birthing room, bleeding onto sheets that would be burned rather than laundered, her arms empty, her body hollow. She was not allowed to attend the baptism. Later, Sister Marie-Therese told her that Father Defrain had performed the sacrament in the chapel with Mother Superior as witness. The baby had been named Thomas, a good Christian name. He would leave for his new family within the week once Ruth's milk dried and he could be fed properly. Ruth spent the next 3 days in bed recovering. Hannah brought her meals, changed her bandages. On the 4th day, Sister Josephine appeared at her door. "You will return to work tomorrow," she said. The harvest does not wait for personal weakness. Ruth returned to the fields on legs that shook her body, aching in places she didn't know could hurt. She worked through pain grief and a numbness that felt like being underwater. She never saw Thomas again. She did not know which family had him, whether they were kind or cruel, whether they would ever tell him he was adopted. The not knowing was a torment all its own. Over the next 3 months, 2 other women gave birth. Lydia delivered a girl who cried constantly for a few brief days before she disappeared. Clara delivered twins, a boy and a girl sold as a pair for $350. Ruth knew this because she overheard Mother Superior discussing the transaction with Father Defrain in the courtyard. Voices carrying through the laundry house window. The Robichaud family was especially pleased to receive 2 children at once. Mother Superior noted that they had increased their donation by 50%. Most generous. God's blessings multiply. Father Defrain replied, "Your work here is truly miraculous, Mother Superior. These orphans find loving homes and the convent's mission continues." Ruth clenched the sheets she was scrubbing. Orphans. That was what they called the babies, as if their mothers were dead rather than enslaved just yards away, breaking their bodies in cotton fields to feed the system that had stolen their children. That evening, Ruth whispered to Hannah in the refectory, breaking the silence while Sister Josephine was in the kitchen. "How long have you been here?" Ruth asked softly. 5 years, Hannah said, eyes flicking nervously toward the door. "Since I was 18. Do you ever—" Ruth faltered. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Hannah laughed bitterly. "Where would I go? I am property of the Theat family. If I run, they'll find me. It would be worse. At least here, I'm fed and not available to the master every night." "But the children," Ruth pressed. "Don't you want to know where they are?" "Of course I want to know." Hannah's voice cracked. "I want to know if they're safe, if they're learning, if anyone tells them about me." But wanting doesn't change anything. This is how it is. This is how it will always be. Ruth stared at her cold, congealing bowl of beans. Perhaps Hannah was right. The system was too entrenched, too profitable, too protected by religious authority. Yet something inside Ruth refused to accept it. There had to be a way to expose this, to make someone listen, to stop the sisters from continuing. The problem was, Ruth could not read or write. None of the women in the penitent house could. That, she realized, was no accident. Illiteracy kept the story invisible, unrecorded, hidden behind the veil of virtue. But there was someone who could write, someone sharp, someone curious, someone who might listen. Her name was Margaret Bellamy, 17-year-old daughter of Dr. Jean-Baptiste Bellamy, a physician to several prominent families in St. Augustine Parish. She attended the convent school studying French literature, religious history, and needlework. Unlike many wealthy girls, she had a habit of asking uncomfortable questions. In January 1842, She noticed something that made her uneasy. She arrived early for her lesson and saw Sister Marie-Therese hurrying across the courtyard, clutching a bundle wrapped in white cloth. The sister glanced around furtively as if checking for witnesses. When she saw Marguerite, she froze. "You're early, Miss Bellamy," the sister said, voice tight. "I apologize, sister. My father had an early call and dropped me off before 8. Sister Marie-Therese clutched the bundle tighter. Marguerite heard a small sound from within it, a cry quickly muffled. "Is that a baby?" Margaret asked, curiosity and dread mingling. "One of our charitable cases," Sister Marie-Therese said quickly. "We facilitate adoptions for unfortunate children. This one is going to a family in New Orleans today. The Lord provides Christian homes for all His children." "Where did the baby come from?" Sister Marie-Therese's expression hardened. "That is not appropriate for young ladies to discuss. The child's mother was a fallen woman who sought the Church's mercy." Sister Marie-Therese said that morning, her voice calm, rehearsed. "Now she has it, and the child will have a better life. Go to the music room, Miss Bellamy. Sister Inez will meet you there shortly." Margaret went, but the encounter lingered like a shadow in her mind. Over the coming months, her curiosity deepened. She began noticing things she had previously ignored. The women she glimpsed working in the fields behind the convent, always distant, always silent. The locked door of the penitent house, which the sisters deflected questions about. The frequency of charitable adoptions announced in the parish records, sometimes 2 or 3 per month. In May, a conversation at the dinner table began to make the pieces click. Her father mentioned a case that made her stomach tighten. "Charles Devo asked me to examine one of his house servants. Today," he said, slicing his roast. Apparently, the girl had become pregnant, and they sent her to the convent for redemptive labor. She wanted to know if that kind of work was safe during pregnancy. Her father continued, "I told him probably not, but I doubt he cared much for my medical opinion." Margaret's mother frowned. "They sent pregnant servants to the convent. It's apparently common practice. Masters don't want them visible on the plantation, and the convent needs workers. After the baby is born, the sisters arrange an adoption. Everyone benefits." Margaret thought about that phrase for days afterward. Who benefited? Certainly not the mothers ripped from their homes and forced into labor. Certainly not the babies stolen within days of birth. Perhaps the adopting families who received children without questions. Perhaps the convent gaining laborers and fees. Perhaps the masters whose sins were neatly hidden. She began observing more carefully during her twice-weekly lessons. The locked door to the penitent house, the women in the distant fields, always 6 to 9. Conversations she overheard between sisters about deliveries arrangements and donations. Babies carried away in white bundles, always by Sister Marie-Therese, always discreetly. By July, she did something dangerous. She arrived early, told the sister at the door she needed to use the privy, then crept toward the penitent house. The door was locked, but she could hear sounds, movement. A woman humming something soft lullaby, like a baby's cry quickly muffled. "Miss Bellamy." Mother Superior's voice cut through the dim morning air, sharp and icy. Margaret jumped. "You appear to be lost." "I was looking for the privy, Mother Superior," she stammered. "The privy is in the opposite direction. This is the penitent house. It is not for visitors." Her Mother Superior's face was composed, but her eyes were ice. Margaret felt a chill despite the July heat. I apologize for my confusion. I will be careful. See that you do not become confused again. Now go to your lesson." Marguerite left understanding she had been warned. The sisters knew she was asking questions, noticing things she was not supposed to see. The following week, the school closed for August due to maintenance, and by September, she received a polite letter. Students over 16 were no longer accepted. The sisters believed older girls should focus on preparing for marriage rather than continued education. Marguerite had been expelled politely but firmly for curiosity. Her father dismissed her concerns. The sisters run a respectable institution. Whatever you think you saw, you misunderstood. Young ladies should not speculate, but Margaret could not let it go. In November, she took an even greater risk. She wrote a letter to the bishop in New Orleans, describing what she had seen, asking for an investigation. She signed it with her full name, sealed it carefully, and entrusted it to a family friend traveling to the city. 2 weeks later, her father returned home furious. "You wrote to the bishop," he demanded. "Do you understand the scandal you could have caused?" "Did the bishop investigate?" "Yes," Margaret whispered. "Mother Superior explained everything. They facilitate charitable adoptions and house women seeking redemption. Everything is proper. Father Dufresne was offended you would question the sisters' integrity. I've assured him it will not happen again. You will not discuss this again. You will not write any more letters. Do you understand?" Margaret understood. She understood that challenging the church was impossible. She understood that enslaved women's suffering was invisible to those who did not wish to see. She understood that the system protected itself perfectly. Yet, like so many privileged young women stumbling upon truths that crack the comfortable world around them, Margaret also understood something terrible was happening in the convent, and no one in power cared to stop it. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, the story in St. Augustine parish deepened shadows, growing darker. What Margaret did not know was that Ruth had been watching her all these months. Her questions, her curiosity, her sudden expulsion from school. And Ruth, planning for weeks, decided to take a risk that could save them all or destroy them. By March 1843, Ruth's second pregnancy became obvious. The father unknown. The fact, irrelevant pregnancy itself was all that mattered in this system. Another October, another baby to baptize to sell another $200 for the convent. Another fragment of her soul torn away. But this time, Ruth had a plan. She had been watching Sister Marie-Thérèse for 18 months, studying her routines. Her moments of weakness, brief flashes of humanity that suggested conscience still lingered beneath the habit. Sister Marie-Thérèse was not cruel like Sister Josephine, whose bell rang with unforgiving precision. Marie-Thérèse was simply exhausted, a woman trapped in work she had never imagined when she came to Louisiana 30 years ago, expecting to teach care for the sick, not midwife enslaved women, and hand their children to strangers. Ruth had seen her hands shake after difficult births, heard her praying softly in French words. Ruth could not understand, but recognized as pleas for forgiveness. Most importantly, Ruth had noticed the leather-bound book Marie-Thérèse kept in her apron pocket, meticulously recording every birth. If that book could be copied, if those records could reach someone who cared, perhaps the system could finally be exposed. The problem was that Ruth couldn't read or write. None of the women in the penitent house could. That, she realized, was strategic. Illiterate women could not document their own suffering. They could not write letters, keep records, or leave proof of the horrors they endured. Their voices, if spoken aloud, would be dismissed unreliable testimony from enslaved women who might lie for their own benefit. But there was someone who could write, someone perceptive, curious, and already aware that not all was as it seemed. Someone who might, if approached, carefully act. Marguerite Bellamy, 17-year-old daughter of Dr. Jean-Baptiste Bellamy, physician to several prominent families in St. Augustine Parish. Marguerite attended the convent school, where sisters taught French literature, religious history, and needlework. Unlike many wealthy girls, she asked questions adults found uncomfortable. Her first suspicion came in January 1842. She arrived early for her lesson and saw Sister Marie-Thérèse hurrying across the courtyard carrying a bundle wrapped in white cloth. The sister's gaze darted about nervously as if checking for witnesses. When she noticed Margaret, she stopped abruptly. "You're early, Miss Bellamy." I apologize, sister." "My father dropped me off before 8, Margaret said. Sister Marie-Thérèse clutched the bundle tighter. Marguerite heard a muffled cry. "Is that a baby?" she asked. "One of our charitable cases," Sister Thérèse replied quickly. "We facilitate adoptions for unfortunate children. This one is going to a family in New Orleans today. The Lord provides Christian homes for all His children. But where did the baby come from?" Sister Thérèse's expression hardened. "That is not appropriate for young ladies to discuss." The child's mother was a fallen woman who sought the Church's mercy. Now she has it, and the child will have a better life. Go to the music room, Miss Bellamy. Sister Inez will meet you there shortly. Marguerite went, but the encounter troubled her. Over the following months, she began noticing details she had once overlooked: the women in the distant fields behind the convent, always silent and at a distance. The penitent house, always locked, always avoided. The frequent mentions of charitable adoptions in parish announcements, sometimes 2 or 3 per month. In May, the pieces began to fit. At dinner, her father mentioned a case. "Charles Devo asked me to examine one of his house servants today," he said. Apparently, she became pregnant, and they sent her to the convent for redemptive labor. He wanted to know if that kind of work was safe during pregnancy. I told him probably not, but I doubt he cared for my opinion. Margaret's mother frowned. They send pregnant servants to the convent, apparently common practice. Masters don't want them visible. The convent needs workers. After the baby is born, the sisters arrange an adoption. Everyone benefits. Margaret thought of that phrase for days. Everyone benefits. Who really benefited? Not the mothers separated from their babies, not the children taken within days of birth. Perhaps the adopting families. Perhaps the convent gaining workers and fees. Perhaps the masters removing all trace of their sins. She began observing more closely during her lessons, noting the locked penitent house door, counting women in the distant fields, overhearing sisters discussing deliveries and donations, seeing babies carried away in white bundles by Sister Marie-Thérèse, always discreetly. By July, she dared something dangerous. Arriving early, she claimed she needed the privy, but slipped toward the penitent house. The door was locked as expected. but she could hear sounds from within movement. A woman humming softly, a baby's cry quickly muffled. Miss Bellamy. Mother Superior's voice sliced the quiet. Marguerite jumped. You appear lost. I was looking for the privy, Mother Superior. The privy is in the opposite direction. This is the penitent house, not for visitors. Her face composed, but her eyes were ice. Marguerite felt a chill despite the July heat. I apologize for my confusion, she said softly. I will be careful. See that you do not become confused again. Now go to your lesson. Margaret left aware she had been warned. The sisters knew she was asking questions, noticing things she should not. The next week, the school closed for August maintenance. By September, Margaret received a polite letter. Students over 16 were no longer accepted, as older girls should focus on preparing for marriage. Expelled politely, firmly, for curiosity. Her father dismissed her concerns. The sisters run a respectable institution. Whatever you think you saw, you misunderstood. Young ladies should not speculate, but Margaret could not let it go. In November, she took another risk, writing a letter to the bishop in New Orleans, describing what she had seen, asking for investigation. She signed it, sealed it carefully, and entrusted it to a family friend. 2 weeks later, her father returned home furious. You wrote to the bishop, he demanded. Do you understand the scandal you could have caused? Did the bishop investigate? Yes, she whispered. Mother Superior explained everything. They facilitate charitable adoptions and housewomen seeking redemption. All is proper. Father Dufresne was offended you questioned the sisters' integrity. I've assured him it will not happen again. You will not discuss this. You will not write letters. Do you understand? Marguerite understood. She understood that challenging the church was impossible. She understood that the suffering of enslaved women was invisible to those who did not want to see. She understood the system protected itself perfectly, but like privileged young women who glimpsed truth through the cracks of comfort, she also understood something terrible was happening in the convent, and no one in power would stop it. What Margaret did not know was that Ruth had been watching her all along, her attention, her questions, her sudden expulsion. And Ruth, after months of careful observation, decided it was time to act. By March 1843, Ruth's second pregnancy became obvious, a new child, another October baptism, another $200 for the convent, another piece of her soul taken. But this time, she had a plan. Ruth had been watching Sister Marie-Thérèse for 18 months, studying her routines, her small moments of weakness, flashes of humanity, and most importantly, her leather-bound book where every birth was meticulously recorded. If that book could be copied, if those records could reach someone who cared, perhaps finally the system could be exposed. Sister Marie-Thérèse's hands trembled as she wrote the candlelight, flickering across the cramped storage room. Every word she inscribed was a betrayal of the order, every letter a defiance of Mother Superior, every stroke a rebellion against centuries of sanctioned cruelty. But Ruth watched her with quiet gratitude, knowing that what was being recorded might one day speak louder than any prayer ever could. It must be exact. Ruth whispered every name, every child, every master, every family who received them. Nothing omitted. The truth must be clear. Marie-Thérèse nodded, biting her lip. I will write what you tell me. But we must be cautious. One mistake, one glance by the wrong person, and all of this will be destroyed. And I will be ruined. I understand, Ruth said. But we can't let fear stop us. These women, these children, no one else will tell their story. Over the next 3 weeks, the two women worked in stolen moments after fieldwork late at night while the convent slept. Ruth dictated and Sister Marie-Therese wrote. They spoke in whispers, their voices nearly swallowed by the night, careful to leave no trace of their conspiracy. Hannah recounted the 3 children she had delivered, her voice breaking, as she remembered their tiny bodies taken before she could even name them. Clara spoke of her twins, sold together for 350s, a price, she whispered, as if even saying it aloud might make it real. Esther, Denina, Lydia, they all shared their experiences, each story confirming the horrifying pattern Ruth had suspected from the start. This was no act of mercy. This was systematic exploitation. Ruth dictated her own story in painstaking detail, candlelight casting shadows on the walls. She spoke of the first time she held Thomas, the weight of his tiny body in her arms. The unbearable moment when Sister Marie-Therese took him away. She spoke of the pregnancies that followed the labor in silence, the fields that never ceased, the unending routine that made grief a companion and hope a dangerous luxury. She named Charles Diderot as the father of her children, explaining how his wife had orchestrated her transfer to the convent to erase all evidence. We are enslaved twice here, Ruth said softly, her voice cracking. Once by the masters who own our bodies, and again by the church that steals our children. Sister Marie-Therese paused, her pen hovering over the page. And if Mother Superior discovers this, then we are witnesses, Ruth said. The truth will be out no matter what punishment comes. The children, the mothers, they deserve that much. For the first time in months, Marie-Therese allowed herself a small, fragile hope. Perhaps, finally, justice could be given a voice. Perhaps the world outside the convent walls could know what happened in the penitent house. And perhaps, just perhaps, the cycle of cruelty could be broken. As they worked through the nights copying ledgers, recording testimonies, and naming names, the air in the storage room felt charged not with fear, but with the quiet power of resistance. Ruth understood the danger they faced. One wrong move, one prying eye could undo everything. But the risk was worth it. For the first time, she felt that the children might not be lost to silence, that their lives might matter beyond the convent walls. And in that flickering candlelight, Ruth and Sister Marie-Therese began to weave the fragile threads of truth into something unbreakable, a record that could challenge the system itself. Dr. Bellamy, ever courteous and careful not to offend religious authority, offered her a seat and some water. Once he stepped away to attend another patient. Sister Marie-Therese's eyes darted to Marguerite. The moment was fragile. One misstep could unravel everything. She moved quickly, lowering her voice to a tense whisper. "Read these tonight," she said, pressing the waterproof pouch into Marguerite's hands. The girl's eyes widened as she felt the weight of the papers. The reality of what they contained pressing down on her chest. "What? What is this?" Margaret asked, her fingers trembling as she untied the pouch. "Evidence. Testimonies from the women. Here financial records showing the profits from their children and my own affidavit of everything I have seen in 14 years. This proves it all. Marie Tizzy said, her own voice shaking, despite the resolve in her eyes. If we do nothing, no one will ever know. The church will continue to hide its crimes, and the children will keep being stolen. Margaret's mind raced. She remembered her first suspicions, her letter to the bishop, her father's furious reaction. Could she, just a 17-year-old girl, really act on this? Could she challenge the authority of the convent? The weight of the church? The power of the families who believed they were rescuing these children? We need someone with legal knowledge, Marie Tizzy continued urgently. Your brother has studied law in New Orleans. He can help. He might give these testimonies a voice that the church cannot ignore. You must promise me you will protect my identity. If Mother Superior learns I helped you, everything is lost. Excommunication, ruin. Perhaps worse. I understand, Margaret whispered, her hands clutching the pouch tightly. I won't tell a soul. I'll do what I can. Marie Tizzy nodded, relief mingling with fear. Go home. Read them. Understand the truth. And then find a way to act. Carefully. Swiftly. And remember, if anyone questions you, trust no one. Not even those you think you can trust. As Marguerite left the clinic that evening, the storm outside mirrored the turmoil in her heart. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the dark streets, while the rain began to drum steadily on the roof, a quiet reminder that danger and revelation often come together. Inside the convent, Ruth worked in the fields, unaware of the exact moment the documents reached Marguerite's hands. But she trusted. She had placed her faith in a young girl, a witness, and in the courage of a nun who had finally chosen to confront her conscience. The next steps would be perilous. The Sisters of Perpetual Mercy were formidable, their authority unquestioned by most. But for the first time in years, the voices of the women imprisoned within the penitent house might reach beyond its walls, and justice, long delayed, might finally have a chance. Sister Marie Tizzy responded with small, careful marks on the notes indicating she understood and was willing to help if cautiously. Over the following days, she began sneaking moments in the convent office when Mother Superior was distracted or occupied, painstakingly, copying entire ledger pages, letters, and adoption agreements onto clean sheets of paper she hid in her habit. Each copied page was a risk. One misstep could mean punishment, exile, or worse. Marguerite coordinated the exchanges with precise timing. She would collect the papers during her visits to the convent under the pretense of assisting with medical supplies, then hide them among her own belongings at home. Each retrieval felt like walking a tightrope over a chasm. The wrong move and everything could collapse. Etienne studied every document with a meticulous eye. The evidence formed a damning pattern. The same families repeatedly received, children payments were systematically recorded, and Mother Superior personally authorized many transactions. The correspondence revealed a chilling efficiency. The convent wasn't merely indifferent, it actively facilitated the exploitation, cloaking it in the language of charity and mercy. Meanwhile, Ruth and the other women continued their work in the fields, unaware that their testimonies were now forming the foundation of illegal assault on the system that had enslaved them, twice over, first by their masters, then by the church. Ruth prayed quietly each morning, hoping that the young Bellamy siblings could navigate a world hostile to both truth and justice. By mid-August, Marguerite and Etienne had compiled a sizable dossier. Copies of the original ledgers, detailed witness testimonies, and Sister Marie Teasy's affidavit filled several packages. The siblings knew the next move was critical. They needed Jacques Deur in New Orleans to take the case, but traveling with the documents carried its own dangers. Interception could alert Mother Superior, Father Dauphren, or powerful parish families. Marguerite, holding the heaviest bundle, yet whispered to her brother as they prepared to leave home under cover of night. This could save them, or it could destroy us. Etienne tightened his grip on the papers, determination hardening his face. We have no choice. If we do nothing, we are complicit as well. But if we act, we might finally stop this. The night air was thick and humid, carrying the distant sound of crickets and the occasional bark of a dog. Every shadow seemed a potential spy. Yet with each careful step, they carried not only evidence, but the hope that for the first time, the women of the penitent house and the children stolen from them might have a chance at justice. There's a lawyer in New Orleans, Etienne said, his voice low but firm. Jacques Deur. He's from the family that donated the convent's land, but he's considered a black sheep. He's outspoken against slavery and the church's complicity. He's made enemies among the wealthy, the clergy, and plantation owners, but he takes cases that others won't touch. He has connections, influence, and courage. If anyone can act on this, it's him. Marguerite's eyes widened. Do you think he'll believe us? He has to, Etienne said. We have documents, ledgers, letters, and a sworn affidavit from Sister Marie Teasy. He can't ignore evidence this comprehensive. But we need to present it carefully. One misstep, and he or we could be targeted. They spent the next evening organizing the packages, labeling them by category ledgers, correspondence master list, affidavits. Every sheet was checked and double-checked. Marguerite wrote a careful cover letter explaining the context, the urgency, and the need for discretion. She folded the papers into oilcloth bundles to protect them from rainfire or accidental discovery. On August 24th, Etienne set out for New Orleans. The journey was long and fraught with tension. Every carriage stop, every passing rider could have been an agent of the church or the parish seeking to intercept the evidence. Marguerite and Ruth stayed behind, hearts heavy with anticipation and fear. Every day that passed without word from Etienne felt like an eternity. By the evening of August 26th, Etienne arrived at Jacques Deur's modest office near the French Quarter. Deur, 46, with graying hair and sharp, determined eyes, listened as Etienne explained the situation in a hushed tone, then began examining the documents. He flipped through ledger after ledger, letters and affidavits, his expression shifting from measured skepticism to incredulous horror. This is worse than anything I imagined, Deur murmured, leaning back in his chair. A network of exploitation protected by the church and local elite. These records are damning. But acting on this will be perilous. Powerful people will resist. They'll claim legality, morality, even God's will, but we have Sister Marie Teasy's affidavit, a white nun's sworn testimony. That changes the landscape. This is the leverage we need to force an investigation. Etienne nodded. We need a plan. More than just exposing them, we need to protect witnesses, document everything meticulously, and prepare for retaliation. Jacques Will you take the case? Doe's gaze hardened. I'll take it. But we proceed carefully. We'll need allies, more corroborating evidence, and absolute discretion. Once this reaches the wrong ears, the convent will do everything to bury it. And those women, Ruth, Hannah, Esther, Clara, they'll be at risk. We protect them first. Then we strike. In the shadows of New Orleans, a strategy began to form, one that would confront the intertwined powers of church law and wealth. The stakes were immense, the danger real. But for the first time, the women who had been silenced for years might finally have justice on their side. The filings set off a storm, the likes of which New Orleans had rarely seen. Church authorities recoiled at the audacity of a lawyer, daring to accuse one of their own, but the meticulous documentation made it impossible to dismiss. Jacques Dero had anticipated every potential defense, the legality of the donations, the complicity of parish families, and the church's claim of moral righteousness. Every counter-argument was countered with fact testimony and irrefutable evidence. Within days, the newspapers began publishing excerpts from the affidavits and letters. Headlines screamed of scandal convent profits from stolen children, allegations of human trafficking. Sheikh parish elite and nun confesses 14 years of complicity in exploitation. The public reaction was immediate outrage, disbelief, and fear. Wealthy families who had adopted children through the convent began to quietly demand explanations, wary of being publicly associated with what now looked like organized trafficking. Meanwhile, back in the parish, Sister Marie T.Z. and Margaret Bellamy lived in tense anticipation. Every visitor, every inquiry, every letter could be a sign that Mother Superior had discovered their betrayal. But as reports of the scandal spread, they realized that the exposure offered them protection. Their roles in bringing the truth to light were now shields against retaliation. The public and press were watching too closely for the convent to act with impunity. In New Orleans, Jacques Dero coordinated with sympathetic clergy and abolitionist networks, ensuring that formal church investigations were initiated while simultaneously pushing civil authorities to examine the legal and moral violations. Letters arrived from bishops and governors requesting testimony, and subpoenas were issued for convent records and for Mother Superior to appear before ecclesiastical and civil inquiries. What had begun as whispered confessions in a dimly lit storage room now threatened to unravel the entire system of exploitation. The convent's carefully maintained secrecy was crumbling, and the women whose voices had been silenced for decades were finally being heard. Justice, imperfect but relentless, had begun its course. It was imperfect justice, but it was justice nonetheless, a compromise between the entrenched legal realities of slavery and the moral reckoning that could no longer be ignored. The women whose lives had been exploited in the convent slowly began to reclaim some agency, though their paths remained constrained by the brutal institution that had defined their existence. The records allowed descendants to trace their origins, reconnect with lost siblings, or at least understand the circumstances of their births. For some, the knowledge brought closure. For others, bitter pain and unresolved grief. Marguerite Bellamy and her brother Etienne returned home to St. Augustine Parish. Their roles in exposing the scandal lauded quietly among reformers and abolitionist circles. Marguerite continued to advocate for women's rights and the protection of children, quietly using her experience to educate others about the dangers of unchecked authority. the complicity of institutions, and the importance of moral courage. Etienne remained a practicing lawyer, his reputation strengthened by his audacity and meticulous legal work in the Diderot case. The convent itself, stripped of its leadership and scrutinized by the press, became a cautionary tale. Parishioners whispered about the scandal for decades, and few ever trusted religious institutions with such authority again. Mother Superior Beaumont's legacy faded into obscurity, remembered only in hushed conversations as a warning of blind obedience twisted into cruelty. Yet, the most enduring legacy belonged to Sister Marie T.Z. Dumont. Her quiet courage had torn away the veil of sanctity that hid exploitation and forced a powerful institution to confront its sins, however grudgingly. The midwife in Philadelphia, tending to poor mothers in their homes, became a living testament to conscience over comfort. Though the law could not fully protect the vulnerable, her actions had illuminated the truth, leaving a trail of moral and legal precedent that would influence reformers for generations. And so in the summer of 1845, Louisiana began to shift slowly, unevenly, painfully, toward acknowledging the humanity of those it had long treated as property. The convent scandal remained a dark chapter, but it was a chapter that inspired courage, accountability, and for the first time, the faintest hope that justice, however partial, could be pursued even against the most powerful of institutions. The directive carefully avoided acknowledging systematic wrongdoing, but it made the previous model of exploitation impossible to replicate. Second, civil authorities instituted new adoption requirements. Birth mothers had to provide consent forms, and all adoptions had to be registered with local courts rather than handled privately through religious institutions. While these measures had limited effect for enslaved women who still had no legal standing, they established a framework that protected future children from covert exploitation. Third, and most importantly, Jacques Diderot succeeded in securing the preservation of detailed records identifying every child who had passed through the convent. These records were sealed in the Louisiana Territorial Government Archives to be accessed only by the children themselves upon reaching adulthood. Though imperfect, this allowed the possibility for some of the stolen children to reclaim knowledge of their origins and reconnect with families separated by the machinery of slavery. For the children themselves, the immediate damage of separation could not be undone, but the trail of evidence provided a future of potential understanding identity and closure. Some were raised in wealthy families who never questioned their origins. Others grew up knowing only fragments of their beginnings. Thanks to the preserved records, the next generations could at least learn the truth if they wished a small measure of justice for lives stolen and futures disrupted. The convent of Our Lady of Sorrows remained under strict oversight when it reopened in 1847, focusing exclusively on educating daughters of wealthy families rather than exploiting enslaved women. It operated in this limited capacity until 1923, remembered less for scandal and more as a cautionary example of what unchecked authority could produce. Margaret Bellamy continued her quiet advocacy, speaking to small groups and writing letters urging reform, while Etienne Bellamy carried on his legal work, championing cases that exposed systemic injustice. Jacques Diderot became a legend among abolitionist lawyers. His work on the convent case, cited for decades as a model of moral courage paired with legal strategy. Though the law had been slow, imperfect, and constrained by the injustices of its era, The scandal left a legacy of accountability. It showed that even the most powerful institutions could be challenged, that conscience and courage could disrupt entrenched systems, and that truth, once revealed, could ripple far beyond the walls that had once hidden it. The story of Sister Marie Thézade Margarita. Etienne and Jacques Diderot endured as a testament to the idea that justice is rarely perfect, but moral courage can still carve out spaces of human dignity in a world that often refuses it. Though imperfect, the measures put in place offered the possibility of some restitution. The children, long separated from their mothers, now had a path, however narrow, to someday discover their origins. The convent of Our Lady of Sorrows remained closed for 3 years before reopening in 1847, under strict oversight, repurposed exclusively for the education of wealthy girls. It continued in that role until 1923, when declining enrollment and rising costs forced permanent closure. The women who had been held in the penitent house returned to their masters. For most, the exposure of the scandal changed little. Ruth returned to the Devo plantation, continuing the grueling work of field and household labor until slavery's end in 1865. She gave birth once more in 1845, finally allowed to keep the child, though the scars of loss and separation never faded. Hannah died in childbirth in 1848, her infant dying alongside her. Lydia, traumatized by the loss of her child, was sold to a Mississippi plantation in 1850, her fate unrecorded. The remaining women, Clara, Esther, Dina Naomi, faded into the vast, undocumented lives of enslaved people in the antebellum South, some surviving to see freedom, others almost certainly not. The children sold through the convent system grew up scattered across Louisiana and beyond, most unaware of their origins. For those who eventually sought the truth, the archives secured by Jacques Diderot proved invaluable. In 1872, Thomas Robichaud, one of Ruth's children, tracked her down through the records. Their reunion was bittersweet joy at discovery, tempered by the anguish of decades-long separation and knowledge of siblings who would never be found. Thomas maintained a lifelong bond with Ruth, honoring her courage, and memory, naming his first child after her and recounting her story to future generations. Marguerite Bellamy married a like-minded lawyer in 1846, continuing her advocacy for justice and charity. She preserved the documents from the scandal in a locked box, later donating them to Louisiana State University to ensure future generations could uncover the truth. Etienne Bellamy became a judge and lifelong defender of justice, working to protect freed people after the Civil War and uphold the legal protections that had once been denied. The convent building itself stood for decades, repurposed and rebuilt. But its dark history was slowly forgotten by the public. A fire in 1956 destroyed the east wing, erasing the physical trace of the penitent house. Yet the evidence, the affidavits, ledgers, correspondence and testimonies remained preserved in archives. Scholars who sought it could piece together the full story, a story of exploitation cloaked in piety, courage in the face of complicity, and the enduring struggle for justice in a world that often chose to look the other way. Ultimately, the scandal of the convent of Our Lady of Sorrows became a testament to the power of conscience and the importance of preserving truth even when the world seems unwilling to listen. It was imperfect justice, but it was justice nonetheless, a legacy that honored the bravery of those who risked everything to expose it. Margaret Bellamy married in 1846 at age 21 to a lawyer from Baton Rouge who shared her sense of justice and her willingness to challenge authority. She never forgot the role she had played in exposing the convent's operations, nor the risks she and Sister Marie-Thérèse had taken to reveal the truth. Throughout her life, she remained committed to charitable work advocating for the rights of enslaved people, and after emancipation for newly freed black families, striving to build stable lives amid the chaos of the Reconstruction South. She carefully preserved all the documents related to the scandal, the affidavits, the financial ledgers, the correspondence, and the master lists, locking them in a box that she later donated to Louisiana State University before her death in 1903. She specified that they should be made available to researchers interested in the true history of slavery and the Church's complicated role in it, ensuring that the story could be studied, remembered, and learned from. Etienne Bellamy. Her brother built a distinguished legal career, eventually becoming a judge in Louisiana's territorial court system. He continued working with Jacques Thiéraut on cases related to the rights of enslaved people, defending the vulnerable against abuses and establishing legal precedents that would protect freed people after the Civil War. He was instrumental in prosecuting cases of exploitation and violence during Reconstruction, using his knowledge and influence to create a measure of justice in a society still grappling with the legacies of slavery. The convent of Our Lady of Sorrows itself remained a symbol of transformation and oversight. After reopening under strict ecclesiastical management in 1847, it focused solely on education for the daughters of wealthy families, operating in that capacity until 1923. The building survived for decades, its dark past gradually fading from public memory. A fire in 1956 destroyed the east wing, including the former penitent house, erasing the physical space where so much suffering had occurred. By then, those who had lived through the scandal were long gone, and the story had become a footnote in local history. Yet, the evidence endured. Scholars and historians who sought the archives could uncover the meticulous records, Sister Marie-Thérése's affidavit, the copied ledgers, Ruth's testimony, and the correspondence between the convent and adoptive families. These documents preserved the truth of what had occurred, exposing the systematic exploitation disguised as piety and charity, and honoring those who had risked everything to speak out. In the end, the legacy of the convent scandal was not measured in wealth lost or buildings repurposed, but in the courage of individuals who chose conscience over comfort. Ruth's name, Thomas's devotion to her memory, Margaret's tireless advocacy, Sister Marie, Tootsie's bravery and the determined legal work of Jacques Thiéraut and Etienne Bellamy became a testament to the enduring power of truth. Even when institutions fail, even when justice is imperfect, the act of witnessing, documenting, and exposing wrongdoing ensures that the stories of the silenced are never completely forgotten. Ruth lived long enough to see slavery end, to be reunited with one of her children, and to die as a free woman, rather than someone's property. In her final years, when Thomas visited with his children, she would sometimes tell them stories about the convent, about the women she had known there, and about the courage it took to speak truth when silence would have been safer. She wanted them to understand that resistance was possible even in impossible circumstances, that dignity could survive even systematic attempts to destroy it. Every system that treats people as property, she told Thomas's eldest daughter shortly before her death, every institution that puts profit before human dignity depends on silence. It depends on people not asking questions, not challenging authority, not speaking uncomfortable truths. The moment someone breaks that silence, the moment someone documents the reality behind the facade, the system becomes visible. And once it's visible, it can be challenged. That's what we did. We made the invisible visible. We made the silent spoken. And even though justice was incomplete, even though consequences were limited, we told the truth. That matters. It always matters. 3 days later, Ruth died peacefully in her sleep, with Thomas holding her hand. He ensured her truth was preserved in stone, a permanent record on her gravestone. A testament that she had existed, had suffered, had resisted, and had ultimately survived long enough to see her story acknowledged rather than buried. Through the courage of Ruth, Sister Marie teased Marguerite Bellamy, Etienne Bellamy, and Jacques Diderot, the scandal of the convent of Our Lady of Sorrows became more than a story of exploitation. It became a lesson about conscience, courage, and the power of truth. Though slavery and injustice continued beyond their lifetimes, their actions illuminated the possibilities of resistance, the importance of witness, and the enduring significance of speaking out even when the world is not ready to listen. The documents they preserved, the testimonies they recorded, and the lives they touched remain a reminder. Systems of oppression can hide behind piety, profit, or tradition, but they are never invincible when someone chooses to see, to speak, and to act. The story of the convent of Our Lady of Sorrows is a stark reminder that history is full of accounts of exploitation, disguised as mercy, cruelty justified through religious language, and vulnerable people systematically abused by institutions claiming to serve them. Some of these stories were exposed and documented, but many more were not. Each one represents real human beings who suffered, who resisted when they could, and who deserve to be remembered, not as nameless victims, but as individuals who faced impossible circumstances with courage. Do you believe everything about the convent was revealed? The truth is, it wasn't. The Church never released all its documents, and countless questions remain unanswered. How many other convents or institutions operated similar systems? How many children were separated from their mothers under the guise of charity or adoption? How many women's stories were lost because no one documented them, or because records were destroyed before they could be preserved? Even decades later, the story remains relevant. It shows how power protects itself, how institutions prioritize reputation over justice, and how systems can exploit the vulnerable while maintaining a veneer of virtue. But it also shows that conscience and courage matter. Ruth, Sister Marie Theresa, Marguerite Bellamy, and others chose to speak truth when silence would have been safer. They made the invisible visible. They made the silent spoken. Even when justice is incomplete and consequences are limited, telling the truth matters. It always matters. If this story moved you, challenged your understanding of history, or made you question the systems that still operate in the shadows, leave a comment with your thoughts. Subscribe for more histories that confront uncomfortable truths, and share this story with someone who appreciates the lessons hidden in the darker corners of our past.